Imagine the Great British Bake Off, but instead of cakes, you get crochet dolls of the judges and an existential crisis about who the show is actually for. Welcome to the Game of Wool finale, the episode where we meet the families, crown a winner, and watch the show accidentally tell us what it's really all about. We made it. Episode 8. There are 3 knitters remaining, Holger, Elsa, and Lydia, and they are all exceptionally strong contestants. Each of them has different strengths, Holger with his architectural eye for design, Elsa with her encyclopedic knowledge of historic knitting patterns, and Lydia who has an amazing skill for bringing her culture and her identity into her knits. They've survived challenges that genuinely seem designed to break them, physically, emotionally, often both, from crochet deck chairs to the chunky vests in episode 1, knitted lampshade swimsuits, the endless group challenges, but now we're down to the final 2 challenges. But before we dive into the challenges, there's just one thing we have to acknowledge. The challenges and the contestants, they're not the only thing that's come full circle this episode. Dai's hair has too. Over the course of this series, Dai's hair has transformed from a cute accessory to a unique fashion choice to a full-on art installation on her head. And in this episode, we can only describe the hairpiece as a yarn donut perched upon 2 knitting needles. It's big, it's bold, and it's impossible to ignore. And it leads me back into that same core question that we've been circling throughout this entire series. What is this show really about? Is it about knitting as a craft? Is it about the contestants and their backstories? Is it about celebrity host Tom Daley, or is it about the judges? You would think that every single detail, from costume to script, would be carefully thought out. Whether Dai's hair was her idea or the production team's idea, it effectively does 2 things. It paints her as quirky at best, kooky at worst, but it pulls focus away from the rest of the content in the episode. If we're all talking about what crazy hairstyle Dai is going to show up with this week, it pulls attention away from the core of the show, the contestants and their knits. Tom's outlandish outfits serve the same purpose. They draw attention away from the purported focus of the show, the knitters and their knits, and they tell us that the real main characters here are the judges and the host. This is only cemented further by the first challenge in the final episode, crochet miniature versions of Dai, Sheila, and Tom. Not the contestants themselves, the judges. And don't forget, they have to be beautiful.
Create the Game of Wool world. And of course, to do that, create us. Instantly recognizable and obviously beautiful characters.
It's cute on the surface, it's playful. The contestants are asked to yarn bomb a post box by creating a topper that represents the show, and they want the judges and the host to be present there. But the finale of these types of reality shows usually show us where our focus should lie. Often they bring the family and loved ones in, which this episode will do, but they really focus on the backstories of each contestant. They let us get to know them even further. They try to lean in to the participants on the show and share a little bit more insight into them. And instead, in this finale, we see a focus on the show itself, not the contestants participating in it. This may not be malicious, it may not even be conscious, but it really underscores something we've been noticing for all 8 episodes of the show. It's not been structured to elevate knitting as a craft or even to elevate the contestants and their skills. The show has been designed to elevate Game of Wool as a brand and all of the partner brands associated with it. Now, to their credit, the contestants really rise to the occasion for this challenge. The amigurumi dolls they produce are adorable. Holger recreates Tom with his over-the-top costume. We were teased with this costume in all of the trailers for the show. We finally get to see it, and a little Freudian slip there. It is an outfit, not a costume, but it does read quite costumey. Dai and Sheila do criticize Holger for leaving loose ends on his amigurumi doll, but that is fairly representative of what Tom is wearing, as it does have some dropped stitches and loose ends visible. Lydia creates Dai, complete with tiny glasses, and Elsa recreates Sheila, complete with the geometric intarsia sweater. They're all adorable. Truly, they're adorable. And they're crochet, not knitting, because Of course they are. What else have we grown to expect with this show?
In a thoughtful touch, the contestants of the show chose to represent those who had been eliminated before them with crocheted symbols on the couch. A smiley face for Isaac, a rainbow for Dipti, and a tiny mace for Simon. This isn't just a thoughtful tribute, it's a way for the contestants to remind us what really matters in this show.
Luckily, the second challenge is mainly a knitting challenge. The contestants are tasked with creating a hat. That hat has to represent them. It has to be original, kind of tell a story, all of these themes we've seen. But you know what? I'm just happy that they are making a real, honest-to-goodness knitting accessory as the final piece in the finale. A hat is a thing that knitters actually make, so I am going to take it as a win. And the projects that the contestants make are genuinely showstoppers. Holger creates this kind of old-timey sleeping cap. He actually references his colorwork vest from episode 1 and mirrors that colorwork and that patterning in his hat, and then he utilizes some textured German twisted cables going down, I'll call it the tail of the sleeping cap, to reference his German heritage. This is the type of creativity that I'm thirsty for in the knitting world. In a world where so much of pattern design looks the same nowadays, this is a hat that is a unique silhouette. It is not something I'm seeing many pattern designers doing, and it's executed so well that I genuinely was ready to cast on. I want to make this pattern. I'm excited by it. I'm inspired by it. This is the inspiration I was hoping to receive throughout the entire series. And I think part of the reason it worked so effectively is because we're allowing the contestants' creativity to shine within the natural confines of the medium. They're making a real knitted accessory, not a deck chair. So it makes me want to cast on too. Ailsa calls on her knowledge of historic knitting patterns to create this beautiful houndstooth hat. She knits it in pieces and seams it. She even hides a little Morse code message in the hat as a nod to the judges, and it spells out Game of Wool, G-O-W, which was a really thoughtful, cute touch, and also a hearkening to the history of knitting. This hat is similarly a creative approach to an older silhouette that really inspires me to do something different with my knitting than I'm seeing done over and over again. I was really inspired by Ailsa's work, but she wasn't immune to the judges' criticisms. They wanted to make sure that her houndstooth design lined up perfectly along her seams. It's so refreshing to see what contestants can do when they're given a standard type of knitting assignment. It really allows their creativity to shine, rather than trying to force the craft into a bucket that wasn't meant to hold it. And then there's Lydia. She creates this beautiful tam, and finally, for the first time in the whole show, she gets to showcase her own beautiful hand-dyed yarn. I am so glad that they finally let Lydia show off her work, show off her dyeing skills, and cleverly, at the end of this episode, Holger and Ailsa's hats both became kits on their own website, and Lydia released a kit for her hat on her own website using her own yarn, which I thought was very clever. Now, on the subject of kits, I've been doing a lot of investigation behind the scenes over the past 2 months, trying to get to the bottom of the finances behind this show, from a £240,000 grant from Screen Shetland to whether the designers are or aren't being compensated for their designs and their kits and how. And I have some answers, and I've found a lot of dead ends. So I'm going to be putting together one final Game of Wool video, a bonus episode if you will, where I reveal all of my investigations to you, the emails I sent, the responses I received, and the responses I didn't. And I try to provide as many answers as I was able to find, and maybe we can draw some conclusions from the non-answers too, because sometimes silence is more powerful than words. So if you're interested in my investigation and my process behind trying to discover some answers here, stay tuned because that one final video will be coming out soon. But for now, back to episode 8. Holger wins. Is anyone surprised? He's been foreshadowed as the winner and the frontrunner pretty much since episode 1. And it wasn't subtle. But it is a well-deserved win. Holger's design ability, his creativity, his knitting skill, it's impressive. And watching him work is a delight. I feel like I learned new things each week watching him work. And because this effectively turned into a design competition, the outcome almost felt inevitable. He had a unique skill set from his experience working on Savile Row, and with some knitwear design, he was uniquely positioned to win this thing. But Holger's success on this show, to me, goes beyond simple design skill. It feels like Holger just kind of knew how to work this show. Like his little sassy quips, his one-liners, his personality shone through in every episode, and he was giving the editors what they needed to paint him as a really likable, relatable character. The internet has fallen in love with Holger over the airing of this show. His personality came across as so fun and likable. You want to be his friend. Whereas I think someone like Ailsa didn't quite know how to work the reality TV machine as well. She comes across as someone who's a little bit more private, a little bit more shy, but if you don't give the camera those quips, if you don't give them something to work with, then they don't really get to paint you in a way that the audience can get to know you and get to love you. And I think the antithesis of all of this is Lydia, right? Because it feels like Lydia got more comfortable as the episodes aired to share her real thoughts to the camera, but unfortunately, she wasn't packaging them in a neat way. So when she would say honest things like, yeah, I would love to win this thing, yeah, I think that I'm a strong competitor, the editors were able to twist those words in a way that made her look unlikable instead of honest and to the point. I feel even more certain that Holger knew how to work the reality TV machine because each week he came prepared with social media content tie-ins for the episode. He would share his sketches and design notes and inspirations behind each challenge. He gave viewers a way to connect with him. And in a show where all you're being paid in is exposure, and you're barely being paid in that, Holger had a way to really reach out to audiences through social media and try and gain more followers as the show was airing, which is basically all that any of the contestants could do in order to find some way to compensate or build a following through this experience. Holger's win was earned, and it was well-deserved, but it also points to an interesting truth that reality TV success only happens if you know how to work the exposure machine in your favor, and it feels like Holger kind of had a sense of how to do that. So that's it. That's the finale episode. They bring in the families and the loved ones. It's very heartwarming. Everybody hugs. Holger gets these golden knitting needles, which that's the trophy. That's the prize, right? We've got no book deal. We've got no nothing. He just gets these golden knitting needles. Some folks thought that was a little underwhelming. And season 1 wraps. All done. And as a piece of reality TV, like, frankly, it works, right? We've got the dramatic music. We've got the judges looming over. Is that a good idea? Is that risky? We've got all of the elements of successful reality TV. But as a representation of the craft of knitting, there is a massive mismatch between what the show claims to do, represent knitting and search for Britain's best knitter, and what it actually does. So first, the time pressure. You cannot meaningfully force knitting into a timed competition. It just doesn't make sense for the craft. Knitting is a slow craft. That's part of the reason that so many of us love it. Its beauty and its strength is its ability to sneak into little found moments of your day. It is rare and unusual to try and sit down and force out a project in the time frame that's been given on the show. The odd thing is, this isn't the first time that slow crafts have been adapted for a reality TV audience. There was precedent to look to here. Shows like Forged in Fire, where contestants were asked in a period of time to create just a partial piece of a knife, and then were sent home to their home forge for a week to create a larger project. We can look at shows like Alone, where survivalists are sent into the wild and given an open-ended amount of time to survive, to build shelter, to hunt, to do the things that they would need to do in a true survival situation. And they filmed themselves. There was little intervention other than checking on their health from the production team. There are plenty of precedents of how these shows could function to celebrate the craft without forcing it into a timed speed knitting competition. But Game of Wool ignores all that. It just says, let's take the Great British Bake Off and copy and paste it and shove knitting into it, and it doesn't work. We can feel the seams bursting in every episode. It doesn't make sense. We see this most clearly in episode 2, where not one team in the group challenge was able to complete a sweater with 2 sleeves, and we do feel a little bit of a shift in the show after that towards crochet, because it just happens to be a faster craft. The second major mismatch is that the show does not ask contestants to make standard knitted objects. Most hand knitters make things like accessories, mittens, socks, gloves, hats. They make sweaters, they make cardigans, garments that can be worn. They might make some home decor pieces, maybe a throw pillow, blankets. And then there's traditional knitting like Shetland lace and ganzes. Game of Wool looks at all of that, the wide library of amazing garments that you can make out of knitting that's well suited to the unique strengths of the craft. And they say, no, what if we knit a deck chair or a wall hanging or a swimsuit or jewelry or lampshade? And to be fair, knitters can make all those things. It's evidenced in this show. I was wowed week after week by the way that the contestants were able to step up into nonsensical challenges for this craft and make them work. It's just not aligned with the strengths or the historical usage of this craft. These challenges were spectacles, they were stunts, and they make for great reality TV, I guess. They make for viral moments potentially, but they aren't an accurate or fair representation of the craft. I've had a sprinkling of comments here and there from people saying, lighten up, it's just a TV show, it's for entertainment, get over yourself, you knitters, like stuck up knitters want their craft perfect, like it's just a fun show, chill out. I hear you, like it's a reality TV show, I get it. But I think this final challenge in episode 8, the hat challenge, showed us how the creativity and skills and knowledge of the contestants could have shown if they were allowed to work within the best applications of knitting. When given the task, knit a hat, without yarn constraints, without weird stunty restrictions, without having to make it wow, 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 or add embellishments, they were able to make beautiful, creative, unique silhouettes. How hard would it have been for the production team to just make the challenges be normal? Socks, hats, gloves, mittens. I think it's telling that the production team thinks all that stuff is boring. They felt the need to spice it up and make it kooky and crazy because they didn't think anyone would care. They're underestimating knitting and they're underestimating their viewers. They have so much potential to work with and they choose to ignore the strengths and heritage and beauty of the craft in a way that feels kind of insulting. And then there's the crochet problem. This show is called The Search for Britain's Best Knitter. The prize is the golden knitting needles, and the show consistently includes crochet in its challenges. Some of them are crochet only. More than half of the challenges have incorporated crochet by the end of the show. And this is not a small detail. I think we can all agree crochet and knitting are different crafts, and they have different strengths. Crochet is faster, which is my theory as to why it is so prevalent in the show. But I think by leaning on crochet over and over and over again, the team behind the show kind of reveals their hand. They are so desperate to fit this format of a timed competition that they are willing to step away from the craft that the show is meant to be about entirely. That production choice also shrinks the applicant pool by a lot, because now you're not just looking for individuals who are willing to leave behind their lives, their families, their jobs for up to 8 weeks. You're also looking for people who are able to take that time away and are also proficient in both knitting and crochet. You're really shrinking your applicant pool here. And this brings us to another mismatch, which is design. This show is obsessed with design. When I look back over 8 episodes of this show, there is only one challenge out of 16 that asks knitters to follow a pattern that is the lace lampshade pattern. For every other challenge, knitters are asked to design something. Design is not knitting. They overlap, but design is its own discipline. For the majority of hand knitters at home, we are following patterns in order to make our garments. And yes, modification is a part of that, but design is not a necessary part of knitting, and for most hand knitters, it isn't something that they do. That's why Ravelry exists. It has over 1 million, many millions of patterns. I'll put an accurate number on the screen. Ravelry exists to be a pattern database for knitters and crocheters because most of us aren't designers. But Game of Wool treats design as the baseline skill and knitting just as sort of like a random medium to get there. We could also use crochet, like who cares, it doesn't matter. The whole point is to create an inventive, unique, wow, 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 impressive, jaw-dropping, stunning, colorful, bold, inventive design. And then after all of that is managed, we can just kind of, as an afterthought, think about technical execution. This isn't inherently wrong, but it definitely makes the show's value system clear. This is a design competition, and it uses knitting and often crochet as its medium, but it's design overall. And this is another reason why Holger's win makes so much sense, why it felt so inevitable. He has the perfect toolkit for success on this show. Experience on Savile Row, established knitwear designs he's already put out and published. He has exactly the skill set to succeed in a knitting design competition. The other contestants mainly showed up as hand knitters. Hand knitters with amazing skill and knowledge, sure, of vintage patterns of hand dyeing, but none with the design chops that Holger has. This also has consequences for judging because if everyone is designing a completely unique item each week, there's no standardization for judging. The Lace Challenge was a great example of what standardization could look like for judging of technical ability. But for the rest of the designs, Di and Sheila end up judging on creativity, they end up judging on vibes, they end up judging on whether the style of the garment is appealing to them personally. And technical ability and difficulty becomes almost impossible to judge. Each piece is so different. Each piece is showcasing such different skills, and the design almost always outweighs the technicals. It also makes it so that blind judging is an impossibility. I always think about the cardigan challenge. It's obvious that the yellow smiley face was Isaac. It's obvious that the modular sideways knit cardigan was probably Holger and Elsa. It's clear after maybe 2 episodes what each individual contestant's style is, and you can deduce from that which item they knit, even if you're judging blind. Judging based on design also means that the technical ability gets set by the wayside entirely. In this cardigan challenge, Tracy drops stitches all the way down the arm and she's sent home for that error. But Holger and Elsa sew their entire sweater on essentially backwards. They sew one panel, which is half of the sweater, on inside out, and they're praised for it as a creative decision, when really it was a technical error. If the show was judging for technical ability, sewing the half of the entire sweater on inside out, it should have sent someone home. But instead, the judges praised it as playful, because that's what aligned with their design inspiration. Without a rubric, you're not judging skill, you're judging based on personal preference and vibes, and that feels really out of place in a competition television show. It's frustrating to watch because the show doesn't really know what it's looking for, what it's judging for, so they allow personal preference to sway the eliminations, and perhaps they keep on the contestants who they think will be the most interesting to watch, who will keep the most viewers week after week, rather than those who are the most suited for the title, Britain's Best Knitter. Listen, they did get one challenge right. The lace challenge was a great example of how technical knitting skill could be evaluated and judged blind. Each of the participants knit the same lace panel. We really isolated for skill. It was truly judged blind, and then we never got a challenge like that again. But it did showcase that it's possible to have real technical challenges in the show, for them to be exciting to watch, informative. We learned something watching it, and it felt like the fairest judging we'd had all season. There is real drama in the craft of knitting. Casting on and realizing that it's twisted a few rows later, dropping a stitch while knitting lace and having to rip back and redo it. But the show doesn't lean into any of that. Instead, it orchestrates drama because it feels like the true, genuine drama behind the craft isn't interesting enough. The producers are trying to manufacture this Great British Bake Off style of drama, like you burned your cake in the oven, there's nothing you can do, the glaze didn't set, it's all a disaster, and that's just not how knitting works. It's just not. Nothing is ever so serious in knitting. But the show really wants to fit that format, and so they kind of manufacture their own false drama in order to fit that model. There were so many times throughout the show where the judges framed something a knitter was doing as risky, and the word risky was used over and over and over again, but it was rarely a genuinely risky move. Like Gordon steeking, that's actually a standard move in knitting. Trying to do intarsia crochet, like all of these are standard skills. None of them are genuinely risks, but the word risky was used to try and amp up the drama. For any real knitter watching the show, it just comes across as ingenuine and false. The group challenges only lean into that. They are antithetical to the way knitting works. For the most part, knitting is not a group activity. It is very rare for a group of knitters to be sitting together working on the same project for a set period of time. It happens, but it's pretty rare, but the show makes this a standard that it has to ascribe to in every single episode, even when it doesn't quite make sense. Like with the lace challenge, was that really a group challenge? Sure, they attached the lace panels to the same lampshade, but each individual was knitting their own panel and being judged individually. So is that a group challenge really? A group format just really feels like we're trying to make fetch happen.
Stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
It doesn't make sense. Why are we forcing this? Then the show tries to layer on another variable to follow in the British Bake Off format, which is blind judging. When the judges step forward to judge the blind challenge and immediately ask, so who made this? What's the point of calling it a blind challenge anymore? You're completely negating the fact that this is blind judging. You're asking the person who made it before you give a deliberation. So why are we calling this blind judging? The audience can see through this. It doesn't make any sense. Taking all of this into account, looking back over 8 episodes of the show, it becomes clear how little Game of Wool cares about knitting as a cultural practice. doesn't care about the rich global history of the craft. It doesn't care about the political contributions, about the feminist implications. It doesn't care about the variety of techniques and the amazing innovations, seamless fabric, stretch. It doesn't care about any of the things that make knitting special. British history alone is chock full of incredible knitting history. Game of Wool does not care about any of that. Instead, it reverse engineers the craft as much as it can to squash it into a proven Great British Bake Off format. It wants to squish it into a time frame. It's even willing to insert crochet as a stand-in for knitting. Game of Wool knows that the type of drama that comes up in knitting isn't the kind of drama that TV audiences are used to seeing in Bake Off or Pottery Throwdown, and so it tries to manipulate and manufacture those to please an audience that it doesn't trust to understand and appreciate knitting for what it is. We did see glimpses of a more interesting version of this show, Holger's unique approaches to garment construction, Lydia's usage of her own hand-dyed yarn and her heritage, Simon's use of knitting with wire, Ailsa bringing in her historical knitting knowledge and brushing out her graffiti letters to create a different effect. The raw material for a show that actually respects craft. It's right there. It's right there. But because the show never truly articulated what it was, it just kind of hid behind this vague title, like the search for Britain's best knitter. It never articulated what that meant. The judging lived in a liminal space where the judges based their determinations on vibes, on personal preference, on aesthetics, and not rooted or grounded in technical ability. It's a real missed opportunity because knitting does have objective metrics, like aligned decreases, how you blocked and finished something, seaming, set in sleeves that don't bubble. Like every element of technicality in knitting can be objectively evaluated. Game of Wool never took the time to truly understand the knitting world. It wants to represent itself as a knitting show, but clearly no one involved in or behind the scenes at the show really knows or cares about knitting. So they borrow that identity. They partner with private equity-owned yarn brand, with judges who have design experience, with a host who is not only Britain's sweetheart, but also has built an amazing knitting brand for himself. And so by adding all of these elements, all of these legitimate knitting elements to the show, they try and make it look like a real, legitimate knitting production. But the show never really trusted knitting as a craft enough to let it lead the format, to highlight its strengths. When a show tries to make money off of a community without actually learning enough about that community to truly represent it, the community notices. Knitting and crochet confusion is the perfect example of this. Of course, the viewing audience picked up on this immediately. Crafters were up in arms behind why the show is billing itself as the search for Britain's best knitter, but incorporating so much crochet. It's perplexing that the people behind this show didn't predict that reaction. It's like asking a woodworker to just weld the pieces together because it will be faster. It is a core misunderstanding of the fiber craft the show is highlighting. And maybe to the people behind the show, to whom their biggest goal was making a buck, the difference didn't matter. But to the viewing audience, many of whom are crafters, the difference matters a lot. As the show accumulated its army of knitting cred personalities, from the judges to the host to the yarn brands involved, it brings us back to that core question: who is this show really about? Who is the protagonist? By the end of episode 8, we have a concrete answer. With the amigurumi challenge, contestants weren't asked to represent themselves. They were asked to represent the judges and the host, who have been centered almost throughout this whole thing, from Dai's kooky hairstyles to Tom's outlandish outfits. Those have carried most of the focus and the marketing behind the show. None of this means Game of Wool is bad or that it's a failure. It just means that we have some crystallized things that we can learn. If the producers of Game of Wool are watching and they're interested in making a second season, here are my notes for the production team. Let the craft dictate the structure. More realistic timeframes would go a long way. Don't box yourself in to using the Great British Bake Off format. Look into other shows that have showcased slow craft and take inspiration from them to allow knitters enough time to really show their skills. And while you're at it, design challenges that highlight the strengths of knitting as a craft, not force spectacle with knitting as the medium. Decide what's being judged and name it out loud. Give us a specific rubric. If you are aiming to crown the title of Britain's best knitter, we should know what skills and abilities are required to earn that title, because right now it feels like just pandering to Di and Sheila's style is the way to earn the title, and it feels mismatched. Separate knitting from crochet, honor them as two distinct crafts, or incorporate them both and rename the show to reflect that. You cannot call your competition Britain's Best Knitter and then have crochet be a main piece of more than half of your challenges. It just feels off. Consider a weekly technical challenge. In British Bake Off, bakers are often given a recipe, sometimes with omissions, or perhaps a vintage recipe that's written differently than modern language, but they're all asked to follow a standardized recipe and produce a standardized result. This is easily judged blind, and it allows technical ability to show. We'd love to see an element like that play itself out in Game of Wool, and the lace knitting challenge was a perfect example of that. More of those types of technical challenges, please. Drop the group challenges. This is just not the way that knitting works in the wild, with a few small exceptions. Unless you can find a way to make them knit logical, the group challenges do not need to be a core element of the show. In fact, the communal element of knitting happens naturally even when people are working on their own individual garments. Let us see the relationships develop in the barn as individuals sit next to each other for hours knitting. That's the banter and community we want to see, not a forced group challenge. And for the love of knitting, lean into the shapes and garments that knitting has been optimized to create. We would love to see the things that knitters actually like to knit represented in each episode. And that's not to say that there can't be like a show-stopping, crazy, kooky stunt piece now and again. It just shouldn't be a core of the show, because it starts to feel like the whole thing is a joke. So much of this is fixable. All the raw materials are there. A community of crafters who genuinely care and are invested to watch this show week after week. Contestants who are excited to show off their skills and creativity in hopes of potential opportunities in the world of knitting. A host with huge popular appeal and who's building the largest knitting brand on the planet as it stands right now, and a craft with more drama and visual richness than most non-knitters would assume. Knitting has woven its way through history in so many different ways, and for passionate crafters, we understand the weight and beauty and gravity of this incredible craft that has both structural and historical innovation throughout its entire history. If anything, the craft of knitting, as it stands at its core, at its most basic, is stuffed with television potential. The production team just didn't know how to highlight and capitalize on that. And this is where I start to feel a little pessimistic, because I wonder, was the show ever really trying to represent knitting? Or were they just trying to take advantage of something that was easily monetizable at a time when it was on the rise? It's no secret that post-COVID, post-2020, and especially in the last year or two, knitting has had an extreme rise in popularity. There had to be someone at some table in a high-up business meeting who said, we gotta capitalize on this. That conversation must have led to Game of Wool. Production owns every single piece of IP made on this show. Kits go on sale hours after each episode airs. Private equity-owned yarn brands are highlighted when the British yarn industry is struggling and small manufacturers and farms could have been spotlighted. Tom Daley has inherited the Let's Get Knitting YouTube channel built on the back of the Game of Wool brand and now being spun off into something he owns. And the contestants, the people without whom this show could not exist, receive no prize money, receive no intellectual property, no rights to their designs. They barely receive exposure. They're hardly tagged or acknowledged in Instagram posts, whereas the show knows how to do that, by the way. Every time that Tom wears an outlandish outfit, the designer who created it is both co-tagged on it, they're shared as the poster. They have lots and lots of acknowledgement for those designers, but for the contestants in the show, there's very little. The contestants receive no direct compensation for kit sales. There's no prize money. There's no book deal. They're basically on the show for the love of the game and the hope of opportunity down the line. And to be clear, this isn't unique to Game of Wool. When you think of shows like Project Runway or Food Network shows, it's all the same. The stuff that's created on these reality TV shows is owned by the network. The fact that it's standard doesn't make it okay. Knitting is already plagued by undervaluation, underpayment, and the expectation of free labor. And that's why when those first kits were released after episodes 1 and 2 by Rowan and Wool and the Gang, their Instagram comment sections flooded with crafters asking, how are you compensating the designers? When we look at the kits that have been made after each of these episodes, we would expect some value to flow back to the designers, some compensation for these kits that are being sold for hundreds and hundreds of dollars, but that doesn't seem to be the case. When an individual produces all of the ideas, skill, labor, time to create something, and they are not fairly compensated for it, or they're not compensated at all, and someone else is able to line their pockets from that person's hard work, there is a term for that, especially in the textile industry. It's called a sweatshop. The context is different, but the mechanics of labor in, product out, someone else gets paid, that all stays the same. But I'm going to pause right there because this video isn't about the money. But if you're curious about the finances and everything that I discovered, stay tuned because, as I mentioned, that video is coming up soon. For now, I want to end this video on something simpler than contracts and IP and kit revenue. I want to just focus on the people who made this show worth watching, the contestants. Holger, Lydia, Ailsa, Isaac, Gordon, Simon, Tracy, Stephanie, Meadow, Dipti. Did I repeat someone? They are the soul of the show. Not the judges, not the host, not the PE yarn brand tie-ins, not the production team. They are the reason that we tuned in every week. And they were paid in nothing except an experience and exposure. And so I think the best that we can do to support them is to follow them, to follow their social media accounts, to help them to gain a following so they can build something out of the show. And of course, to support their businesses for those of them who have some. Lydia's yarn brand, Waiku Yarn, Holger's designs, General Hog Buffer on Ravelry. And I'll link all of their social medias that I can find and all of those online shops in the description so you can check them out and give them all a follow. I think it is the biggest thank you we can give them for participating in this experiment of a show and providing us with entertainment. Whether we were angry at our screen or excited at it, we were watching. So thank you to the contestants for being a part of it with so much grace, creativity, humor, and positivity. If there's anything that this show proved, there is definitely an audience for a knitting show like this one. In a hypothetical season 2, what I hope for the most is respect for the knitters, respect for the craft, and most of all, time. Enough time for the people involved in the show to really show their abilities and skills. If you've enjoyed my coverage of the Game of Wool series, thank you so much for watching. And I do intend to continue making commentary videos on knitting culture and community. So if that speaks to you, make sure to stick around. About 80% of my regular viewers are not subscribed. So hitting that subscribe button is a sure way that you will get my next content in your inbox. But if you definitely don't want to miss it, including the Follow the Money video, there are a few additional ways that we can keep in touch. If you'd like to directly support more content like this, you can consider joining my Patreon. It is brand new, but it will support me in doing more deep dive content like this Game of Wool series, and it will enable me to continue having live knit nights like we had with the watch parties each week so we can knit and chat together. I've also launched a Discord if that's more your speed for anyone who wants to continue the conversation in between videos, and it gives me an opportunity to see what you're knitting as well. So if you're interested in that, that link is in the description. Holger, if you're watching this, congratulations. Despite all my criticism of the show, it was a delight to see you work each week, and your win was well deserved. I'm excited to see what comes next from you. And as someone who used to work in the publishing industry, I feel confident that there are publishers knocking down your door for your first book deal. So a little advice from me is make them fight for you. Lydia and Ailsa, this competition was impossibly close. In fact, it was literally impossible to judge because there was no rubric. So all three of you are winners in my eyes. And since there was no actual prize, I guess you technically all did. To the rest of the cast, thank you for making knitting visible, for putting yourselves in crazy conditions to produce beautiful knitted items that we could admire each week. That's it. Episode 8 finished. There's only one more video left in the Game of Wool series, and that's Follow the Money. So stay tuned. You won't want to miss it. As always, it's been really fun to talk about knitting with you today, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye.